Greetings all, this is Umel from Umel Gaming, and welcome back to another Monster Hunter video. Jeez, it's nice to say those words once more. Long story short of where I've been, well, my last videos explained that I was unemployed at the time of making them, and in the time since then and now, my good PC that I used to game and make all my videos on decided to croak on me. The PC I'm using right now is fairly old, but at least it works for my purposes. I'm hoping that I can potentially stream on this one. No promises. But at the end of the day, that isn't why I'm making this video. I thought that with Sunbreak just around the corner, and Base Monster Hunter Rise ending in the pretty much only a couple days after this video comes out, I thought that it would be a good time to encapsulate my thoughts on Base Monster Hunter Rise and what my hopes are for going for the future into Sunbreak. Essentially, I want to create a civil discussion with you all in the comment section down below on the topic of what you thought of Rise and what your hopes are for Sunbreak in the future. Now, while you're down there starting this conversation, if you could drop a like on the video, maybe hit the subscribe button as well. I honestly cannot promise a constant stream of content, but I'll do what I can considering my situation. Now then, to start, I'm going to get this disclaimer out of the way. When Monster Hunter Rise had dropped its last title update, and I had hit HR 100, slaying Valstrox, and then later gaining access to the Infernal Springs, basically, if you ignore all the event quests we got, this was all the content that Monster Hunter Rise had, I had clocked in around 100 to 150 hours into the game. As of right now, I am sitting at approximately 350 hours. You should see the actual save file up in the video here. And then with every single quest, except for the challenge quests in the arena, completed. That includes every single Apex emergency has been done. Suffice it to say, I love Monster Hunter Rise. That being said, just because I love a game doesn't mean that I'll ignore flaws that the game does or doesn't have. So let us address some of the flaws that it has, and later on we'll go to discuss some of its merits. I would like to note that I can miss a few of these flaws, just like I can miss a few of the game's merits. It doesn't mean that they are not there, and I encourage you to bring them up in the comment section down below. Just remember, everyone, let's keep things civil. First off, I want to talk about the most egregious flaw that Rise had. The lack of Apex armor and Apex weapons. The fact that they did not exist honestly goes against the very heart and soul of what makes Monster Hunter, well, Monster Hunter. Some people might argue that, oh, the Rampage weapons, they are the Apex weapons. You need Apex parts to make the Rampage weapons. In which case, I need to argue, no. Those weapons exist in order to reward people for performing the Rampage content. Well, yes, their Apexes are tied to the Rampage, and that's where we initially fought them. There is a big difference between hunting an Apex during the midst of a Rampage and hunting an Apex on its own as its own just unique hunt. What makes it worse is that the Apexes were genuinely fun fights. I honestly think that they were probably some of the most fun fights that Monster Hunter Rise had. I actually love doing these. Unfortunately, I don't get rewarded enough to make it worth the effort, outside of the fun time. But if I'm trying to get a group together, that's not going to cut it. The next issue, and another one I'm sure we can all agree on, is the lack of an endgame loop. The endgame grind, as it were, is to simply grind out talismans via the melding pot, which isn't a new feature per se. Older Monster Hunter games had talisman grinds. It's somewhat of a staple of the series at a point. Honestly speaking, World and Iceborne were the standouts for making the grind for decorations instead. Now, the issue isn't that we grind for talismans. The issue is the method that we go about it. In older games, such as Generations Ultimate for example, talismans were their own rewards for completing quests. You got them at the end of quests, separately from monster parts, and then you would take these talismans and you would meld them to make other talismans if you didn't get anything good. The issue here is that whereas the old world would create quests specifically designed to farm out these talismans, Rise became much too freeform, I would say. It became a situation where we have so many ways to farm, since it's about 80% of the high rank monsters can be used. We have so many ways to do it that as a player base, we have decided to opt into the most efficient option, and oftentimes the most efficient option is also the least fun option. I believe there's a quote from a game developer, I forget who, but they said something that if given the opportunity, a player will take efficiency and take the fun out of the game, or something along those lines. I forget the exact quote. I'll probably have it looked up and have the video here. However, as I said before, Rise isn't just all flaws. As mentioned, I love this game. So let us move on to what I think Rise did right. First of all, a system I cannot give enough credit, and if there was one system I think I'd want to have carried into future games, it would be the switch skill system. Switch skills allow for a weapon to have a lot longer life cycle than they normally would by becoming a slightly more refined version of what we know as the Generations hunting style system. The main difference between these two is where the hunting style system is static changes that you just choose from, basically like a preset or a loadout. The switch skill allows you to adjust each individual piece of what makes your hunting style your hunting style. It also allows for Capcom to create new things for new weapons, to expand upon the life cycle of these weapons, but at the same time, people that like the weapons the way they currently are don't have to change it going forward, and it helps preserve the weapons the way we know them as. Another thing I love about Rise is its freedom of movement. At least I can say freedom of movement outside of combat. There is an argument to be made whether or not the freedom of movement within the combat is a good thing or a bad thing. So that I kind of call that like a neutral state. But if we're talking about freedom of movement outside of combat, or more specifically, the exploration and navigation of the terrain and the maps and the locales that we find ourselves in, is wonderful. You're essentially grappling from place to place, running up cliffs and ruins. It's a very liberating feeling. While World experimented slightly with the wedge beetles, Rise has decided to take this to the entirely new level. They also go on to reward players by hiding pieces of lore around the map, and even if you're not a lore buff, these hidden relics give you a decent chunk of research points upon their first discovery. Not to mention, scattered across the map, oftentimes in obscure locations, you'll find various pieces of endemic life that can be used to assist you in your hunt. So, understanding the map's layout and finding an efficient route to go from a camp to the monster, picking up various endemic lives along the way, it's rewarding. The final point I want to address on the topic of Rise is its monster variety and the monster iteration. Rise has an assortment of monsters, from spiders to amphibians, from wyverns to monkeys, from rodents packed with explosive gas to two sea serpents who fly in the sky and quote-unquote combine to make the final boss. The game has it all, so nobody can argue that we got a lot of monster variety. But what do I mean about monster iteration? By this I mean that many of the returning monsters have the best iterations of their fights in Rise. Let's take Rathalos and Kushala for instance. These two fights annoyed hunters to no end in older games because of the fact that these monsters constantly wanted to stay airborne. Rise has made them the best they have ever been. Of course, this might have something to do with the wire bugs, which allow us to have aerial mobility in the air. But at the same time, Kushala doesn't stay in the air nearly as long as he did. So it's not just that. Of course, some iterations of the game aren't all good. You have certain monsters like Rajang, which honestly speaking is rather lackluster. So it's not to say that every monster that's a returning monster has had their best iteration in Rise, but a lot of them do. This is why I list this point of monster iteration as a positive overall. With Rise discussed, although I could go much deeper into the topic, and honestly, I will in the comments down below with you all. I just want to briefly touch on my hopes for Sunbreak moving forward. To sum it up, I want Sunbreak to adjust Rise's faults, but double down on its strengths. For example, I want Sunbreak to have an appropriate rewards for its challenges. Don't do the Apex Monster scenario, the way Rise did. I want there to still be monsters to represent the endgame level challenges, but make the rewards worth doing to match it. Yes, I am obviously aware of what Capcom has announced up to now when it comes to Sunbreak, but they have yet to announce what their endgame monster loop will be. While we are at it, make monsters such as Basil and Steve, who is a new addition into Sunbreak, actual invaders. Don't just have them be normal monsters in the map. I want the endgame loop to be engaging with the player base. Make it appropriately difficult, but at the same time, make it just as rewarding. Make it so there exists enough content to choose from that it doesn't go stale, but at the same time, selective enough that we are not lost looking for our own most efficient methods to farm, like in base Rise. We have already seen that each weapon is getting new switch skills, not to mention the switch skill swap, so double down on its strength. Make the new maps for the Citadel and the Jungle both fun to navigate, with lots of intrigue and lore to find on the maps, but at the same time, don't be afraid to add maybe a couple of great wire bugs to the old maps to make some of the areas that were more isolated easier to gain access to. A good example is at the base of the pyramid in the flooded forest in the top right corner, the place where Rajang sleeps in the flooded forest. That spot is very annoying to get to. If you could pop a great wire bug that sends you straight there, somewhat close to one of the camps, that would be great. We've already seen a plethora of additions of monsters to the roster, some of them genuinely adding even more variety to what we've already had, making it a phenomenal list, such as crabs. Honestly, Sunbreak looks to have one of, if not the best monster roster that we've ever gotten in a game. But don't be afraid to take some of the monsters that are returning cast and make it so that these are the best iterations they've ever gotten. At the same time, maybe use the whole transition into Master Rank as an excuse to take monsters who didn't have the best outing in Rise, such as Rajang, and maybe improve upon them. All in all, I got a lot of hopes for Sunbreak. It doesn't have to live up to every single one of my hopes. As someone who's continued to play Rise so thick and thin, I am confident that even if only half of what I want to pull off, it would make Sunbreak a phenomenal game. But what do you all think? What are your thoughts on Rise? Or perhaps your hopes for the Sunbreak expansion? As always, if you made it this far, I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you remember to like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill over here on YouTube. This has been Umel from Umel Gaming, and I will see you all next time. Later.